A warm welcome and thank you for joining us for this particular bulletin. My name is Rona Nahabwe with Winnie Wiyiza Nakawish in the sign language. It's the 7th of October. We are approaching the National Independence Day and I would like to wish you a happy Independence Day. To begin with, the Bank of Uganda has increased the central banking rate by 1%. That's up to 10%. The decision was announced during the Monetary Policy Committee. And what does it mean to increase the central banking rate in order to keep inflation under control? We have more.
From 9% in August to 10% in September 2022, the annual headline inflation rate increased. From 7.2% in August to 8.1% in September, annual core inflation rate, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, has increased. The annual inflation rates for energy, gasoline, and utilities, which had been rising since the start of the year, decreased to 18.7% in September from 19.6% in August, providing some relief from the pressure on prices. To limit inflation, however, we must raise the CBR. We also consider the medium-term projection level for the CBR.
Attainable because CBR is the benchmark that all other rates follow. Bank of Uganda impacts on the CBR because it wants other rates in the economy to follow the CBR. And when they increase the rate of the CBR, intuitively all other rates will go up, and that will discourage demand for money and will discourage inflation.
Is it reasonable for the central bank to come out and sustainably boost the CBR, given that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a terrible effect on Ugandan economy and the chances for growth are being threatened by this?
Economy cannot easily grow with higher inflation. If you doubt this, you can ask what is happening in Zimbabwe. You cannot even make plans. So what we are saying today is that allow us first deal with this faster evil of inflation. Then when prices are stable, we shall now come up with mechanisms, including reducing CBR. When everything is now okay, we can reduce CBR. Why? To support growth. Now we are increasing CBR to what? To control inflation. When inflation goes, we shall start reducing CBR. Why? To enable people get access credit and do what? And do their businesses. Why? To increase economic growth.
In the coming months, headline inflation is forecast to rise and average around 7.3% in 2022 and between 8 to 10% in 2023 before declining back to around 5% in 2024. In this case, Ugandans have been advised to stay calm and patient.
As Central Bank, we have diagnosed, we have the three factors that we feel have been the causes. The external factors, the war in Ukraine, the global supply chain disruptions because of COVID, then we have been having drought. We have hope that sooner or later we shall have things improve. Why? It's raining, so we know we are going to be assured of food. Once food is there, we can deal with now other things. I'm also hearing, even as Central Bank, we are hearing that Ukraine and Russia, they are a little bit talking. Yes, Russia has covered off some parts, but they are coming to tables. So if the global tensions also, geopolitical tensions also come down, then it improves more on the supply chain globally, but also the flow of goods globally also becomes easier because there are no wars, there are no this, and then that means the oil prices, if you've been seeing the oil pumps, they are coming a little bit down, although the OPEC.
The outlook for inflation is very vague because there are several concerns to be aware of. The risk of equation is tilted towards higher risk. The entrenchment of higher inflation expectations, the escalations of geopolitical tensions and the resulting disruption of supply chains, a tighter monetary policy by major central banks, further depreciation of the currency, and the effect of unfavorable weather on food production are some of the upside risks. Monica Nabyonga, Smart 24 TV, Business Today.
Moving on to the World Investors Week, the ringing of the bell of financial literacy ceremony marked the end of the Global Investors Week, that is the Uganda Securities Exchange. The Uganda Securities Exchange joined the rest of the globe to commemorate the World Investors Week as we look forward to making more plans which has had a subject of its own or theme, that is sustainable and investor development. We have more.
In celebration of annual International Organization Securities Commissions, the World Investors Week, the Capital Markets Authority, partners and licensees have organized several activities to raise awareness about investors' education and investors' protection initiatives.
We had two themes this year, this 6th edition of the World Investor Week, and the two themes were investor resilience and confidence and sustainable finance. So during the course of the week, we had a couple of events where we met CEOs and CFOs of companies within Uganda, different industries, agriculture, pharmaceutical, banking, among others. And we had discussions on how sustainable finance discussions can be, well, create enlightenment around sustainability. And these particular issues involve environmental, social, and governance. So that was one of the events, and it was quite fruitful. The turn-up was very good, and we think we did educate the CEOs and CFOs on how to raise capital within the capital markets.
Several discussions that have been going on, organized by the Uganda Securities Exchange and the Capital Markets Authority, about the implications of ESG, environment, social and governance issues, the importance of environment, social and governance issues in the governance of companies, in raising of capital. We're aware that the whole green financing area is expanding at an exponential rate. So companies need to be a lot more mindful about their environmental, social and governance credentials in order to be able to attract financing. Governance is always seen as something that's expensive, but it's important because it gives investors confidence that their investments are safe. So indeed, the better the governance of companies, the easier it is for them to raise capital, and it's even easier for them to charge a higher price on the value of their shares if they're well governed. Because at the end of the day, capital markets financing or market-based financing is non-recourse to the balance sheet of companies. It's all dependent on the revenue and the cash flow generated by companies. And so there's a strong direct correlation between good governance and profitability of companies, which is really to the benefit of investors through dividends.
The Capital Market Authority also noted cases of individuals or firms holding out as investment advisors and fund managers, as well as pyramid schemes operating physically and through online platforms, which seek to take cash deposits from unsuspecting members of the public with a promise of exceptional investment returns. Desire Nambiru, Smart 24 TV, Business Today.
Moving on to the Continental Free Trade Area, in the effort to further economic integration for the continent and create single market for products, the African Continental Free Trade Area is an ambitious bilateral agreement. Smart 24 TV, in a meeting with the head of the Continental Free Trade Area, they underlined the need for care because there are complications with the project in the area that need to be resolved. We have more.
The objective of the African Trade Area is to create a single continental market for goods and services, with free movement of business persons and investments, and thus pave the way for accelerating the establishment of the Continental Customs Union and the African Customs Union.
And exporters of manufactured goods on the continent. I'm just making an example of the opportunity that the AFCFTA does offer. We are in partnership with Afreximbank. We usually engage on trade missions with Afreximbank so that the trade finance questions that arise, they are immediately available to answer the trade finance questions. And in most cases, actually, to start business origination and deal transactions and supporting transactions. So on our next visit, we will bring Afreximbank with us because we think it's important that as we open the markets, we also open the markets to trade finance.
The trade area is to combine the gross domestic product of around US $3.4 trillion to be achieved by making significant policy reforms and trade facilitation measures across African signatory nations. However, there is a challenge of transport and connectivity across the region.
That as we open the markets, we also open the markets to trade finance. Transport and logistics is a very big problem, particularly air transport and air connectivity in Africa. I went to the AU summit in Malabo in May. I traveled from Accra to Lomé, from Lomé to Cotonou, from Cotonou to Lagos, from Lagos to Malabo. That distance, if there was a direct flight, it would have taken about an hour. But it took me the whole day because of this challenge of connectivity and air traffic connectivity, in particular in Africa. We have raised this matter with the CEO of our airlines in Africa. We've also raised it with the ministers of transport.
The AfCFTA aims to reduce tariffs by using a single currency, which manufacturers say will ease trade.
It's very good on paper. The only challenge I envisage is the issue of having a single tariff, which is very, very tricky. First of all, we all use different currencies. Uganda shillings, South Sudan, they have their own currency. Tanzania shillings, Kenya shilling, Rwandan francs, Burundi francs. It might take some time to be actualized, but it's a very good initiative. Free trade area, the barriers revolve around tariffs there. We might agree that we are going to have a single tariff across the board. But when you reach in Congo, where there's roadblocks after roadblocks, kit kidogo after kit kidogo, it becomes a little bit of a huge challenge.
We are ready. At least about 150 companies are ready to export. What did we do to make them ready? With the help of our development partner, UNDP, we have been training them on the requirements. We have been helping them on the quality. We have been training them on what it means to export, the documentation required, the process, how they are going to be paid. So this is what we have been doing, and we have been training them.
Martha Nimsima, Smart 24 Business Today.
Moving on to clean energy transitions, today only 140 million people in the Great Horn of Africa have access to electricity. That is Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan, and more, as well as Uganda. Less than 15% use clean energy. In a study by the International Energy Agency, it reveals that to have full access to modern energy across the continent by 2030, they would require $25 billion per year. We do have more. State Minister of Energy says integration of energy resources and balancing to utilize will ensure that green energy stays in place without wiping out other energy resources.
In the case of Uganda, having those vast sources of green energy, we should not actually negate the potential of integrating the fossil fuels into the green sources of energy, because that blend enables us to get the money that we require to develop other sources of energy. So this is where we are at a mix. While we are talking and discussing in various fora, transition from dirty energy to clean energy, Uganda, we're actually saying we have got to see a mix, because we have all these sources. We should actually be discussing more on integration, which would be healthy for the environment, healthy for the development of the economy, healthy for sustainable achievement of the development goals, that equilibrium, that common position where we develop clean energy, but also using dirty energy that we have to balance the development of the country.
Which we will have, was financed actually by the African Development Bank. Unfortunately, Uganda is not in that project, but we are trying to include Uganda and other countries in another initiative for renewable energy, which will be financed by the World Bank. But I can give you roughly, and I will be very humble in this, is like 2 million can at least help us in the short term. At least to put in place this strategic planning.
Some of the priorities of clean energy transitions and investments in the region include renewable energy and universal access to clean and cooking solutions.
I'd like to emphasize is the financial gap, because to fulfill this vision of the greater Horn of Africa having a bigger economy, not increasing so much the energy demand, but changing the mix to a more modern, to a cleaner mix of fuels, you need investment. And you need a blending of public and private. You need to attract climate finance and a number which is not only for the region, but for the continent, Africa as a whole, to provide universal access to electricity and clean cooking to all Africans in the continent by the end of the decade. We need 25 billion USD per year.
Energy efficiency is a key lever to reduce strains on the growing energy system. Relieving energy pressures on consumer bills, managing fuel import burdens, limiting the scale expensive infrastructure, and lessening the risk of dumping inefficient appliances and vehicles. Runana Habwe, Business Today, Smart. Moving on, the government has released part of the financial year 2020-2023 budget totaling to 48.1 trillion shillings. The Q2 expenditure releases have been set, taking into account that the approved performance in the revenue and need to support the economic recovery. Bronya Katusime reports.
The government of Uganda budgetless debt, external financing and local revenue amounts to Ugandan shillings 26 trillion and Ugandan shillings 13.13 trillion has been provided for the first half of the financial year. This came in as the Ministry of Finance released the budget of the first half of this financial year and highlights of the second quarter of the approved budget 2022-2023.
The country is aware, and we have stated severally, the approved budget for this year was 48.13 trillion shillings, as summarized in the table. We have wage approved at 6.375 trillion shillings, and at half year, we have released 3.605 trillion, a performance of 56.6%. And I will explain later why there is a slight more release than what we had anticipated or what was approved. The non-wage, the total budget approved is 11.1 trillion shillings, and we have so far released for half year, or by the end of this half year, we would have released 5.8 trillion, which is 52.3% of that budget. On the Government of Uganda development budget, the total approved is 7.85 trillion shillings, and by half year, I would have released 3 trillion, slightly above 3 trillion, which is 38.5%. On arrears, domestic arrears, the approved budget 661.95 billion shillings. By half year, we would have released 701 billion, which is a performance of 105.9%. We have been very generous on paying arrears. So the total Government of Uganda budget approved was 26.001 trillion shillings, and by half year would have released 13.135 trillion, which is 50.5%. On the debt, the total debt approved was 15.17 trillion shillings. By half year would have performed at 7.88 trillion, which is 51.9%. So we are very compliant with our debt repayment. External financing, the approved is 6.716 trillion. By half year, we would have performed at 3.947 trillion, which is 58.8%. Local revenue, the total approved is 239 billion, and we are going to report on its performance by half year because the numbers keep coming in.
There happened a complaint from the local government about their money.
The outcry from local governments about Ministry of Finance keeping their local revenue. It continues to come, and as we were in the local government budget consultation meeting, it also came in, and they are saying very, very, very strongly that when you collect their money, you don't give it to them back. Someone has brought in 100 million, and you end up giving them only 80 million. My understanding was that actually, even at the first release, you actually even gave them an advance. But it would be good to understand the process, like you have really clearly articulated on how you release the funding here, on when a local government, when do they receive less money than they have given you?
The Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Finance addressed the nation about the economic performance and the second quarter release of the financial year 2022 to 2023.
Financial year 21-22, revised estimates from Uganda Bureau of Statistics show that the economy grew by 4.7%, exceeding the initial expectation of 3.8, as this economy continues to recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the emerging shocks which have impacted us. Notwithstanding all of that, the economy of Uganda has continued to be very resilient, growing at 4.7% as opposed to the projected 3.8% for the last financial year. Now, performance so far this financial year, which started in July, indicates that the economy has continued on its recovery path, as shown by high-frequency indicators of economic activity.
Ramadan Gobi continued to inform on how the government is curbing inflation. There was a positive outlook in growth in Uganda, supported by the government, public and private investments, especially in the oil and gas sector. However, inflation increased from 9% in August to 10% in September 2022.
It was mainly driven by the depreciation of the shilling due to strengthening of the US dollar, which has affected the prices of imports. And this has led to what we call imported inflation. In other words, the Uganda shilling depreciated against the US dollar to 3,832.4 per US dollar in August, from Uganda shillings 3,791.6 per US dollar recorded the previous month.
In addition, the release caters for 33% of the local government and development grants to enable them implement projects timely, and the balance will be released in the subsequent quarters.
Government's policy response in curbing the inflation, therefore, requires us to coordinate both the monetary and fiscal policy. On the monetary side, Bank of Uganda has increased the central bank rate to 9% in August and further to 10% in October. And the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development has implemented supportive fiscal policy in the first quarter of this financial year, which has helped to slow down the inflation without compromising continued economic recovery.
Bronia Katsime, Smart 24 TV, Business Today.
When considering Uganda's journey towards its 60th anniversary, that is the independence, between 1977 and 2001, the collapse of the East African Airways and East African Airways resulted into the revival of the Uganda Airlines. Beg your pardon. The resurgence of the airlines has resulted in a number of modifications to commercial system and an aircraft. Our reporter has the history.
East African Airlines was established in 1967 as a result of a major attempt to bring in ground for regional carriers in East Africa, which encompassed Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania.
And when they had the East African Airways, the initiative then was to bring in what you call a regional carrier, and that's why they formed the East African Airways.
As the East African community broke up and assessments were divided among the three nations, with Kenya taking the largest portion, East African Airlines also fell apart.
Community collapsed. It collapsed with the East African Airways. So the assets were split, and you will recall that most of the airline assets went to Kenya. Now, Uganda then set up under Idi Amin what we call the Uganda Airlines Corporation.
Due to slow infrastructure development, expensive aviation equipment, and political unrest, the aviation industry in Uganda and Africa as a whole has experienced sluggish growth.
Has taken time to grow because of the delay in the development of the infrastructure, airports, navigation equipment, capacity in terms of passenger loads.
The 60 years of independence have been godsend in that they have permitted the new Uganda Airlines to remerge with innovative and fresh adjustments to their fleet and business operations.
Everything now on aircraft, tracking systems, commercial systems are all digital now. You can book your flight on the phone, wherever you are. You can even, if you decide to travel to Nairobi today, you could just book your flight now.
Uganda Airlines has been able to inject 50 billion into the economy in just 6 months, which has enabled to generate a number of jobs.
In the space of 6 months, we've been able to inject 59 billion into the economy worth of contracts. So that means that we have created direct and indirect jobs.
Naba Lilian, Smart 24 TV, Business.
Business Today will now take a short break. Stay tuned.